Well, thanks everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. Coming out tonight, and we have a very special guest. This is Bold Ideas, right? We've had Sarah, I can't see you, but how many have we had, Sarah Hill? Do you, right, this is the fifth in this series where we like to have experts in certain fields related obviously to school, education, parents, thinking, and have those experts in discussion with me about ideas, big ideas around those topics. And so tonight, you know, we have someone very special. It's Dr. Mary Helen Immordino-Yang. She's here. Round of applause.
Yeah.
We'll do another one too, because I'm going to tell you a little bit about her. You probably know of her. Synapse certainly does. And anyone who is thinking about teaching and learning and the science of teaching and learning, right, and particularly what the brain does in that process knows about Mary Helen. So we're really, really excited for her to be here. She is a professor of education, psychology, human development, and neuroscience. Did I get that right? Yeah. All right. At the University of Southern California. And she studies the psychological and neurobiological development of emotion and self-awareness of adolescents in educational settings. So it's perfect for all of us, since almost, I think, all of us here either teach or work with kids or have kids. And since earning her doctorate from Harvard in 2005, did I get that right? Okay. She has received numerous awards for her research and her impact on education and society. For example, she has been awarded the Honor Coin. Did I get that right? Yeah. What is the Honor Coin? This is from the United States Army.
Yes.
What is that?
It's an honor for your work.
It's an actual coin?
It's a coin, yes. Yes, so it was given to me by the Army TRADOC Command for work that I did preparing soldiers to go to war and be compassionate peacekeeper forces in Afghanistan.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's a great award.
Yeah.
Yes, you won. And then the Rising Star by the Association of Psychological Science. There's so many awards here. And currently, Mary Helen is conducting several multi-year neurobiological research studies on adolescent students and their teachers, which I love too. So it's both students and teachers.
Yes.
Say something about that.
Yeah.
Because I love that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, if you, you know, I kind of think about it, for those of you who've learned about infant development, right? There was all this tons of work on infant development some decades ago where people were trying to understand what babies do, what babies can do, you know, what they know, what they don't know, what can you kind of trick them into showing you about what they know. And then the scientists came to realize, oh my gosh, if you actually have a parent with the infant, their abilities totally change. They can do all kinds of things when they're sitting on a parent's lap that they don't do when you just put them in a chair and their parent or caregiver leaves, right? So it's sort of along those lines, you know. To understand learning, I think you really have to understand teaching and learning in the same kind of dyadic interaction. So we're trying to understand the interactions that are happening between people and the ways that people are transferring meaning and co-constructing spaces for thinking together. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. Read that. I thought that was just great. And you're doing so much more around like the role of emotions and what they play, how they play into the human development, right, of all of us. And I could go on and on about all the things you've done and what you're doing, but I wanted to point out those in particular, and just again, thank you for coming and having a conversation with me tonight in front of these people. And before we get going, we talked a little earlier. For those of you who don't know, Mary Helen was here today talking with staff. We had a staff day at Synapse, and it was just super and inspiring. Some teachers were even emotional about it. Shocker at Synapse, but they were. But tonight I wanted to focus all of us on a few things because they're always on the forefront of my mind as head of school at Synapse. And so there's four things in general. Why community and ideas matter. We talk a lot about ideas, right? Again, this is called Bold Ideas. But for us as a school, the ideas, the questions almost matter more. Secondly, why agency is so important for young people. I think about this a lot as a parent. I think about their ability to find agency. And I think it's so critical. And then how to curate and cultivate an experience that enhances learning for kids and adults. We think about that all the time at Synapse. It's not just the kids, back to the teachers, right? There are adults there as well. And then obviously parents, what they should be concerned about and what they should learn to let go of. I think of this all the time. Right?
I'm a parent too.
I know,
so,
and we
yeah.
have kids similar ages, right?
Yeah, we
Like
do.
I have a 22-year-old, an 18-year-old.
That's exactly what I have.
Yeah, and
A 22
so
and an 18-year-old.
I now think back and go, wow, what was I so uptight about? Oh my gosh, you know, and what really we were talking a little bit about like what really matters to us now as a parent. It's quite different than when they're 5 or 6. So those are sort of the things I wanted to frame around tonight, right? So my first question is just simply, how are you? We ask that all the time.
Thank you for asking. I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah, I'm excellent.
You need
I had a
anything?
really
You're
fun
all
day
right?
today with your faculty. They're a very great group.
They're great people. Yeah, they're engaged, they're
Yeah.
bright.
I know. And last night I stayed overnight in my son's dorm room in a sleeping bag on the floor, so I'm all good.
They're going to think like, wait, you couldn't give her like a per diem?
No.
This is cheapskate.
Yeah. So I'm all good.
It's
Yeah,
all good.
I'm
yeah.
great.
Yeah, and we were saying I've done similar things to my son who's in college in Colorado. I love staying in his terrible apartment with his awful roommate. It's the best.
Yeah. It's really great, especially like what's in the fridge in the morning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's for my kid. It's like Pabst Blue Ribbon, bacon, a lot of bacon. Yeah. Anyway, all right, let's get on track here. So my first question is really around the environment. You talked about this a little bit today with our teachers, the community, right? The conditions for optimal learning. How important is the context for a student, right? Where they go to school, their family, their communities. How important is that?
Hugely important, really. I mean, we kind of co-create our context though also. So I think it's really important to remember that kids make their own context in part, but then they also have certain kinds of resources and affordances and opportunities and assets and liabilities in the context around them. And then their development is happening in the dynamics of that space. So it's huge. The way we grow and develop as people is inherently ensconced in cultural, social, physical contexts. And so those things are shaping the kind of development that we do.
So the teachers, the kids, if you're a parent, I mean, what should you be thinking about, right? I mean, in terms of schooling, should you be digging deep into like who the teachers are? I mean, how much control does even a parent have around that, right? Public school, it's different. As a parent, what would you recommend? Where should they plant their kid if this is a garden?
Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. I mean, I think one way to think about it is to really think about the interaction between your child and the context around them. So when you're trying to decide what kinds of opportunities to make available for your child, what kinds of, positioning to put them into as best you can so that they can then leverage that and grow themselves in ways that are going to suit them, you don't want to just be thinking about what are the features of the context or the environment. You really want to also be thinking about what are the needs of the kid and what are the proclivities of that child and what are the kinds of assets and kinds of resources and kinds of opportunities that would be well suited to helping them develop themselves. So looking at that match, I think that's key.
Is there a time, if you have, I remember being a parent of a kindergartner, for example, I wasn't really sure.
Yeah.
So in that case, what
How
do
you know?
Yeah, how do you know?
You watch your kid. You watch how your kid feels and what they're thinking about and what they're doing and, what are they telling you about when you pick them up from school? How do they look like they're feeling? How are they behaving toward you, toward their friends, toward their siblings? What are their kind of proclivities that are developing? What are they doing in their free time? What are they kind of acting out and showing you that they're mulling on, thinking over, right? And I think that's the ultimate of how you know how an environment is for your child. You want to understand what the environment is for sure. I mean, there are things you need to know about that need to be safe, that need to be, available. There's all that. But then the match is really you watch your child and help them learn how to sort of take advantage and adapt to something that's a good fit for them. And if it's really not a good fit for them, they'll show you that, I think.
Right. So you mentioned proclivities. And those things that our kids, sort of move towards, right?
Mm.
Um, who, as my kids are both super physical, right? And I tend to be super physical too, right? I sort of make meaning by moving through the world physically. And I talk to parents who are concerned about their kids not being into certain things. Often it's math. And how much of that is it, are like my kid is really into bicycles and boards, both my kids, snowboard, skis. Is that something, did they get that from just being exposed to me? Like how much?
Now you're asking really deep, deep questions.
But I mean, it could be, you
Yeah.
know, if I was really into, I don't know, math, like, would they be
More interested in math?
more interested in math?
Maybe. I mean, you know, it's complicated because you come with sort of, you know, propensities, dispositions, you know, that we really don't understand the origins of those, right? But then also those things only can sort of actualize in environments. So then they're built by the person through using them, through leveraging them, through their active adaptation to the world around them, they learn, right? As they're trying to take advantage of the things that they see and engage with the stuff that it catches their eye or that interests them and interact with other people around what's interesting them and sort of what's available and what's expected and the norms of, you know, behavior and of mind in a place and of heart in a place, those start to shape the way the person and the place kind of co-construct one another. And so, you know, you can't micromanage people. They're not white blank slates when they get to you, right? And they're also not sort of preformed. I mean, there's something in between. And so you're shaping the kinds of opportunities that you kind of can put them into, navigate them into, so that they can start to leverage the parts of themselves that they're strongest at, that they're inclined toward, that they can start to really work on and build out. And then you're trying to help them leverage those things in the service of other stuff that they may be less inclined toward or less, you know, have less sort of, you know, facility with, you know. And one of the ways that you do that is also by helping kids to have opportunities to experience different things. So that's kind of the job of a parent, right, or of a school, is to help not just kids to make meaning of the things they're doing and they're seeing, but to help them understand the importance and the meaning of the things that they don't know how to see yet, right? Inviting them into things that they wouldn't have known existed before they started to think about those. Helping them to recognize the importance of problems or issues that may be far away or could be right under their nose, or even in their own behavior that they don't recognize, have certain kinds of origins, certain kinds of patterns to them. And by helping people start to notice in a different way, that's what good education does. And then as they learn to notice, they can build out skills for thinking about different problems in different kinds of ways. And that's where things like mathematical thinking or sort of more narrative or artistic thinking or, you know, more, you know, physical moving through the world. Like these are all things that all of us can do to varying degrees. And then the job of school and the job of parenting is to help kids leverage those capacities and build out those capacities in the service of something that the kid owns, that the kid's really, you know, driving and is, you know, that's really kind of both capturing them, but also that they're fighting to get more of, you know, that they're hungry for.
So, because I was thinking about this earlier today, we have a new play structure that we're going to open. You saw it. We're going to open tomorrow to the kids, and it's awesome. Actually, it's really fun, and there are multiple elements to the play structure that are challenging. If you know, they're going to push kids to actually take some risks. And I was. So I spent a lot of time on that structure today. Actually, I was really excited
I saw you
about
out there.
Yeah, and and it was fun. But I was talking to Isha, who's probably out there in the audience, I can't see, who is our director of technology, about this, around this idea of mathematical thinking or thinking through the physical world or artistic thinking. Again, is this something? And maybe you don't know, or maybe we don't know. Is this something that develops from exposure? Like, for example, could I have been, I don't see the world in mathematical terms. I just sort of don't. I see the world in very physical, right? I'm always thinking of analogies in the physical space, right? But I talk to students even, and they do see things mathematically, right? Or my daughter sees things artistically, actually. I mean, how does that develop?
The real answer to that is we don't know. Yeah, we really just don't know where things like talents come from. I mean, what makes Picasso Picasso and Mozart Mozart, right? That said, both Picasso and Mozart had very particular kinds of opportunities around them that allowed them to leverage whatever it was that they were really itchy to do in very extraordinary ways. And there's no amount of art lessons that would make me Picasso, right? I'm just not Picasso. I'm never going to be capable of being Picasso. Um, so I think that kind of speaks again back to this, what do you expect of your kids, what do you do, right? You don't decide for them what they're going to be able to do, but what you do decide is what they're going to be exposed to, what they're going to learn to appreciate doing. And even if you can't think about it, even if you don't tend to think about it mathematically, you have done enough, I presume, mathematical thinking about things that you can appreciate it, right? And that you can also leverage it if you needed to. Or you could, collaborate with somebody else who does see it that way, and then start to think together about what the melding of two approaches might give you that one or the other wouldn't. So it's really about having the kind of stick-to-itiveness and disposition to try things, to think about things in many ways, to be able to take multiple perspectives, multiple kinds of approaches to understanding, things that are in the world, and then having the sort of inclination and disposition to continually deconstruct one's understanding also. We often tend to be in schooling and also in parenting to looking for the highest edge of performance, where really the best performance often comes from a child's sort of natural inclination to deconstruct skills into their pieces again, and to start to play around with those pieces and reconstruct and deconstruct in ways that allow you to really manipulate and master, understand things in ways that you wouldn't have if you were just going for the ending. I'm not an art historian, but I do remember learning about this with regard to Picasso, right? Or since we were talking about him, so he started first by mastering all of the all of the masters that came before him. And when you look at his drawings, when you look at his early painting, when he was 8 years old, he was doing drawings that that copied artists who came before him. And then when he had mastered everything, he began to innovate on his own and go in these new directions that leveraged things, but also gave us all a new perspective on planes, or on space, or on three-dimensionality, or on color, right? So you're thinking about that for all young people, that you're giving them opportunities to sort of engage with and manage things, and to find the thing that they can do and kind of interpret it and deconstruct it and reconstruct it enough that they can start to make it theirs. And that's what real learning, that's what meaningful learning really looks like. And it also sets you up to be a meaningful learner, an agentic learner throughout your lifetime, of all manner of topics that come your way, not just of things that are sort of esoteric and intellectual in a sort of scholarly sense, but also of real world problems, or political situations, or other kinds of ethical or historical or future-oriented issues that start to come up, to have the dispositions and to be able to pull from the skills that you've learned before to notice, oh, this is a kind of a problem where a quantitative approach could help, or this is a kind of a problem where a physically embodied sort of movement approach could help, right? And so when you've played in those spaces, you can then pull those back in to thinking again, and it makes your thinking more complete, more flexible, more adaptive, more creative, more innovative over time.
So it's not because there's often in my world, I'm hearing kids today need to be a master of one thing, right? They have to be focused, to compete in the world. But it doesn't sound like that's necessarily true, right?
No.
If you're learning, you can pull from certain things that you understand how to learn in multiple contexts. Is that true?
Yeah, I think that's key, right? And with multiple kinds of people, and in multiple kinds of spaces, and in multiple kinds of sort of frames of mind, so to speak. And then I think people want a child to be an expert in something because they understand that there's value to knowing what it feels like to be an expert, right? But if you think back to the times when maybe your kid was an expert, right? And think about those things. I mean, lots and lots of our 4-year-olds were probably experts on dinosaurs for a while, right? Is that because you thought, oh, hooray, my kid's on track to be a paleontologist? Maybe you have some paleontologists amongst your children. But for the most part, you were thinking, hey, watch my child learn how to learn about a topic that's very far from their daily experience. Make that real. It's got technical aspects. It's got sort of scientific classifications that you can learn how to make. You can wonder about the ways that creatures interact with their environments and what kind of teeth you would need to be able to live in that environment versus this other one in this nation. So you're learning all of this ecological thinking, all of this scientific classification type of thinking, all of this thinking about other worlds and other places and imagining what could have been there and then that isn't now, right? All of those skills are what your 4-year-old is learning. It's not just that they now are on track to go into paleontology, although maybe some few of them will.
And at that 4-year-old, that 5-year-old, right? They're exploring, right? This is the exploratory phase.
Yeah.
When does it move out of that, right? I've heard like myelination happens in the brain, what, 13, 15? Am I getting it right?
Oh, I mean,
You're the
there are
expert.
there are major waves of myelination that happen periodically throughout development.
Okay.
But we sort of, for lack of a better number, we kind of tend to think of 26 or so as being like adult-like myelination, but really there's waves of myelination that are happening that have been documented into people's 40s, and now there's new work showing, for example, in perimenopausal and postmenopausal women, that there's new waves of myelination and even neurogenesis that are going along with those hormonal shifts. So brain development is a lifelong endeavor. It's really, the more we study it, the more we realize it's not just for kids, and it's really actively being shaped by the way you think all the way through your lifetime.
So it's not, because I've always thought, right, 2-year-olds, 12-year-olds, those are peak times.
Those are important times,
Okay.
but there's other important times too. So, and when you think about what those times are, any time's important, but there are some times when they're particularly important. And by important, I mean particularly sensitive and in need of a lot of opportunities for input and through relationships and things like that. And then also, they tend to have a couple of features that all kind of flow together when you have these periods of really important sensitive development. And those are a lot of physical growth and changes in the brain and the body, which go along with hormonal and physiological changes in the brain and in the body. And those inevitably go along with new cognitive capacities and dispositions of mind, the ways in which you come to think shift periodically throughout the life course, right? And those go along with shifting social roles. So you put all of this together and you get these developmental stages that are at once kind of deeply characteristic for an age range phase, something, whatever you want to call it, but they move, different people are going through them at varying ages, but there's a kind of regularity to it also. And so you see these periods of particularly intense, all 4 of those things, hormonal and physical and neurological and psychosocial and cognitive growth all at once. And those happen in early childhood. They happen again around puberty and adolescence. Again, major changes hormonally, major changes in the body, major changes in the brain, major changes in social roles and functioning, major new capacities cognitively. And then another major wave of change is the next time that people have this kind of systematic hormonal shifting is generally around the transition to parenting, right? And that's for both or however, many adults are very, very close to an infant and in a relationship together.
It happened to
Happens
me
to men,
too.
yeah.
Oh, wow.
And in fact, the quality of hormonal shifting that happens in of the father of an infant, and so if you do have a heterosexual couple with an infant, right, the quality of hormonal shifting and alignment between the male partner and the female partner and the infant predicts the quality of relationship building that they have and the quality of relationship and bonding between the infant and the father in particular. Later, this is Darby Saxby's work at USC, but other people's too. So there's that major period of hormonal reworking again, and also with neuroplasticity. So around the transition to parenting, people tend to get increased, sort of myelination and also flexibility and network configurations into the prefrontal cortices, which are the ones that allow you to have a lot of executive control and sort of planful behavior and reflective behavior, right? Which is what you really need if you have this little, teeny infant human you need to be taking care of day in and day out. And then another major period of change like that again is around menopausal shift for women. And probably there's something akin to it in men, but we don't know yet. And then you get, again, these shifts late in adulthood, which are associated with sort of a slower movement, like slower physical movement. There was a cool study that just came out showing that musicians who were highly, productive throughout a long career, like so musicians who have had decades-long careers who are famous for their work, they went and analyzed something like, I don't know, some thousands of songs that musicians had written across decades of their careers, and they showed that they systematically get slower with time. And they also, there's some features that change, but
Like
they
the
systematically
songs
get slower. The
themselves slow down?
songs are
The
slower.
tempo?
Yeah, the tempo of the songs is slower for the person when they're older than when they were 20. Yeah. Yeah, so these patterns are part of our sort of diurnal and lifelong rhythms, and they give our work and our thinking particular kinds of roles and particular kinds of meaning and particular kinds of sort of contextual factors that help us to, contribute different things to society and to communities. So we're really, our biology and our sociocultural selves and the things we produce and the kinds of intelligences we bring and the ways in which we learn and adapt are all sort of tied up into this big kind of cauldron of, stuff that's all sort of bubbling together. And it has the different dimensions to it, but there are these kind of life course regulatory patterns that tend to happen. And when you're thinking about children and little kids, you're also a parent, you're also changing as you raise them. And so you're interacting with them and you're watching them, and your job is to kind of not to micromanage them, not to make them do things, right? It's to help them make themselves do things. It's to put them in positions where they can then be able to manage themselves in ways that they couldn't before, and then leverage those opportunities for developmental progressions into spaces that help them build out capacities that they didn't used to have, or new ways of appreciating what they're doing or what they can do. And you become more and more sort of capable of managing yourself in a broader range of situations, more and more capable of noticing things that you wouldn't have known to see or wouldn't have been able to see before, and then more and more able to kind of express and analyze and narratize those things in terms of values or beliefs or songs or artistic creations or scientific experiments or pedagogical capacities in teachers, any kind of skilled domain of behavior.
Right. You mentioned sort of executive function, right, or sort of
Yeah.
around this, and we talked about this today. And I know this is a big thing for teachers, but it's also big for parents. They're talking about it with me all the time, this concern
Yeah.
right, of executive function. So talk a little bit about that now. Today you mentioned it sort of going back, you toggling back and forth, right? Sort of the seesaw effect. Yeah, for our parents here, like what do you want? What should you expect from an early adolescence in terms of executive function? What does it look like? How should it appear as a 12-year-old?
Yeah. Well, you won't be surprised if I tell you that it's going to look really different in different kids. And not all 12-year-olds are at exactly the same stage of development, right? Not all 25-year-olds, not all 50-year-olds, not all 80-year-olds are in the same stage of development. But here's what it should look like in a kid who's sort of optimally positioned to grow themselves. It should look like them being able to slowly manage themselves in new ways over time. And recognizing that the development of new capacities and skills is inherently dynamic. It's not a linear trajectory from one thing to the next, and now I can do this, and so next week I can do that, and the next week I can do that, right? It's much more dynamic, so you do things, but then it falls apart when the context shifts, and then you rebuild it a new way, or then you recognize how the context had shifted, and now you have new insight you didn't before, and then so you're kind of learning how to become flexible and manage yourself in new ways, in new kinds of situations, under new conditions that introduce complexities that before you wouldn't have been able to manage. So what does that look like for a 12-year-old? It looks like, I mean, I'm sort of generalizing here, right, which I hate to do, but if you're looking at, your 8th grader-ish, right, your 7th and 8th grader, you're looking at a kid who is into something, right? You want kids who are excited and interested in something, and who know how to manage themselves when they're thinking about that thing they're interested in. They have the capacity, they have the disposition, they have the self-management capacity, they have the self-control to actually hold their mind on the thing they're interested in and to help themselves think systematically through when they hit barriers or difficult parts or parts they don't understand. So what you don't want to see is kids who are, so sort of fickle that they give up so easily. They can't think through things when they actually care about the thing and want to think it through, right? And you want kids who are really eager and interested to grow themselves in that domain or in a range of domains, and are also interested to share that with other people in whatever way that they want to. It's very intrinsically human to try to express the meaning you've made to others, to share that meaning with others, to co-construct it with others. And so this is where friendships and peer relationships and relationships with, appropriate kinds of relationships with a range of adults, right, with different kinds of experiences, with different kinds of talents and skills that they can help, with different kinds of roles they can play in a child's life, all of that is really what you would love to see wrapping around your 7th and 8th grader.
I can't help but think of this, of confidence, right? I mean, in the Valley here, there's often this discussion or commentary on, failing, right? You got to fail and struggle and that kind of thing. But I think of my own 2 kids, and they're confident in certain domains, right?
Yeah.
And as a parent, I am so relieved because I know they can express themselves in that domain. My son, example, I mentioned before, he rides a snowboard. A couple weeks ago, a bunch of professional, Olympians showed up at the mountain he rides in Colorado, and they were just looking to ride. And he's like, I'm going to go ride with those people. He's just like, I'm going with, that crew of Olympians, right? He was so confident, almost, irrationally. But I was like, wow, you just asked to hang with them? He's like, yeah, of course, why not?
Yeah.
And I love that for him in his sort of life, right? Like to be able to just feel so capable, right? I mean, how do you foster that? How do you develop that? Is that just part of this sort of, having executive function around an area you're into, being able to express it, like for him to express it to his father when he was early, or earlier in his childhood? I mean, how important is confidence?
I mean, I would kind of step that back to let's start first with self-awareness. Being able to sort of situate yourself in a setting and know who the others are there, but also query who they are, not make assumptions, or make assumptions, but then step back to verify those assumptions, to kind of deconstruct them, to maintain a kind of openness to experience, and to kind of bring that openness to the opportunity to learn, to seek. What I was really impressed about your son doing that is he's seeking out opportunities to learn, right? He sees something that he would be an opportunity where he could possibly learn something that he doesn't know how to do, and then he's eager to go try that out, right? And then from that self-awareness, you can sort of dynamically cycle through, things, confidence, but also, times when you feel less confident in yourself, which that could be very adaptive. It actually could be more honest too. I mean, if I go and try to ride with those dudes, I'm going to kill myself, right? I mean, it's like, no matter how much confidence I had that I could do it, if I can't do it, like, it's dangerous, So, I mean, I think being aware of yourself is the key, and being able to, and this is really executive function in the true sense, being able to notice yourself in a context, and then be able to backtrack and get back in different ways when it's not working or when it's going in a direction that isn't good. So being able to be mentally flexible and self-aware. These are the kinds of skills that go in early dementia, for example, right? Where, my parents are, in their late 80s. This is, a time period where I'm seeing one has dementia, one does not, but still, like, that kind of ability to sort of get on a path and know something, but then flexibly step back and go, oh, well, wait a minute, maybe I didn't know that how I thought I did, or maybe let me come back into it. That kind of mental flexibility and agility is very difficult. And it's the kind of thing that that elderly people sometimes start to lose. And it's the thing that you really want to develop in young people. And it's the kind of thing also that is associated with, certain kinds of developmental affordances and opportunities, like bilingualism, right? Bilingualism, biculturalism in families who speak multiple languages and who have multiple cultural communities they're part of. Kids learn to be more aware. There's a new study that just came out this week showing that kids, this was somewhere in Europe, forget exactly where it was, might have been Germany or something, but kids who were bilingual and bicultural, had at age 8 they had significantly better perspective-taking abilities for other people's other people's perspectives and beliefs, right? Which isn't surprising because they're constantly learning to understand from multiple perspectives what's going on. And so, the confidence, I think, is kind of one way you could see that, but really that confidence, you could deconstruct it into something much more meaningful than just having confidence, which is he has self-awareness, he has an eagerness to learn something, he has something he's super into that he wants to learn about, and he saw an opportunity and knew that he was actually in a position to safely and responsibly take advantage of that opportunity, and so he went for it.
He said safely and responsibly.
Yeah, that part's for your wife.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. Very safe.
Yeah,
very responsible.
safe, very responsible. Yeah. Okay.
All right. I want to shift this a bit because I read this today. I read this. I wish I didn't read it, but it was a Substack on AI, and it's coming to eat everybody's lunch essentially, and it was talking about not just the white collar jobs, right, that were going to be consumed pretty soon within the decade. But then it mentioned this Barcelona-based modeling agency called The Clueless. Anyone else read this? Yeah, and it's this guy, Ruben Cruz, founded this modeling agency. He realized he was having trouble dealing with models, right? Like fashion models. Okay. So he's like, I'll just create an AI model. And and like I saw the visuals, it's like shocking. And her account, this model, this AI, 187,000 followers. It's growing, and so he decided to design this person named Lopez this AI, excuse me, after having trouble working with real models and influencers. And he explained that he designed Lopez with a distinct personality based on what society finds most appealing. And my first thought, like, oh no, right? Are we cooked, right? It's one thing to replace, I don't know, programmers with AI. Sorry.
I have those guys.
Sure. I don't know, like lawyers. I hear they're going to be cooked as well. But like, I was thinking about like, 'cause today you showed an image of a smiling famous person,
yes,
right, who had a smile that wasn't congruent, so to speak, right? It wasn't symmetrical. Right?
Yeah, it wasn't symmetrical, which is actually a sign of sort of genuineness,
yes,
likability.
And so I went back after that, and I was looking at this AI generated model. I was trying to figure, like, it was very symmetrical.
Oh.
And so my question is are our kids, are we going to be able to discern, like, our brains, right? Because you were saying, like, we could see that face of that person and see it wasn't symmetrical, and the crow's feet, and we're like, okay, we could trust that person, or that's genuine. How's our brain going to deal with this?
With the AI?
Yeah.
Well, I have an experiment exactly on that. Just
this
kidding.
is just
no,
a question for me because I'm just nervous about this.
Yeah,
I don't really care about
okay, so let's deal with the nervousness. Let's just go there first, because about are you one of the 148,000 people? Then I don't know that I have to deal with her. But I'm not either. I never heard of her. But or it. I'm not sure what we call them. Anyway, but if you think about, what are you nervous about, really? Right. You're really nervous that you're not going to have any value, that you're not going to be able to do anything better than this machine can do it. But there are so many things that these machines just do not do, are at this point completely incapable of doing, that are fundamentally human things. And so we've always, throughout time, we have invented tools that have frightening capabilities. Sometimes we've used them in really frightening and horrible, horrific ways, and sometimes we've leveraged them for good, and sometimes the same tool in both directions, right? And this is one of those really, I'm not an expert on AI, but this is one of those really pivotal moments for humanity where we need to think about, what do we want this tool to be able to do, and how are we going to use it in beneficial ways, and how are we going to, regulate it and manage it in ways that we start to, that we, cut off the harmful ways. But in terms of your own nervousness, I don't think there's cause for nervousness. These, machines don't love you. They don't love your children. They don't, care for others in the way that we do. And these kinds of very fundamental relational ways of constructing meaning together that we do with other humans and with other living beings, not just even animals, but also, when we move through natural spaces and things, those kinds of, physiological sort of co-regulations of living beings together are very, very fundamental to our health, to our mental capacities, to our well-being, to the kind of mind that we develop and grow. And I don't see any kinds of machines that are going to be able to do that anytime soon. They can mimic it to varying degrees, right? But when you watch those AI models that are trying to help patients in physical therapy, like put books on the shelf and stuff, I mean, the patient learns to trick the robot really quickly. There's no way you would trick a golden retriever that way, right? You taught that same dog to do things, right, that are going to help this person keep practicing their walking and encouraging them to keep walking. You could get an animal to do it better at this point still. So it's not that the machines won't get there, but I really think we need to just build these machines into things that are going to be tools that are going to help us with the things they're better at than we are. And we're going to maintain the control over what those things are, and also the control over the pieces that are uniquely biological. Biology has a very certain kind of logic and rhythm to it, and it's very social. Our biology is deeply social. And many other creatures now we're finding, even plants and things, are much more sort of interactive on different time scales than animals, but they're much more interactive. They're sharing information, trees are, across their roots and things like that, about plagues and germs that are coming and all these kinds of things. There's just much more communication and interaction amongst living beings than we really had ever appreciated before. And that piece of us is fundamental to who we are. And I don't see it going away. I don't see it being taken over by anything.
Okay, good. I'm not that nervous, but I thought
Okay.
it was super interesting. But I feel even better now. But so does that that social interaction? How much does proximity play into that? Do you I'm thinking now of distance learning or what we learned about Zoom. I mean, do we need to be in close proximity to each other biologically for that to really manifest?
It really depends on the skill level of the person, because, right, if you're a kindergartner trying to do kindergarten via Zoom,
that was fun. Remember that?
I know, right?
Oh
that does not work well, And if you're an infant trying to interact via Zoom, that's impossible. They don't even often notice that the thing that they're looking at is actually a face, right? It just doesn't trigger faceness. I mean, these are famous experiments from Pat Cool and others decades ago, showing that children don't neurologically recognize that speech coming out of televisions is actually speech. You have to have a real person in the room with them when they're an infant for their brain to say, oh, ding, listen to this as if it's speech and not just other kinds of sound, right? We are attuned biologically to being in the presence of other biological agents. But that said, we also have minds and bodily physiologies that we can learn over time, capacities for managing and controlling. So we can imagine ourselves into spaces. So when I work, with my lab team members over Zoom, we can have incredibly, good conversations where we're working through complex ideas, because basically we are both highly skilled social people who are adults who know what we need out of that interaction and who are able to fill in the rest as if the other person were there, right? So if you're a person who's housebound and wants to do college classes over the internet from very far away, this is an amazing way for you to actually dial in and be part of a class that's happening 500 miles away from where you live that you could never get to, but you're bringing to it what you can't get by not being physically there. You're imagining yourself into the space. You're bringing the social skill. You're conjuring the relationships that you don't directly experience, but that you have to experience in this kind of distanced or kind of vicarious way. So it puts more work on the person. So there are certain kinds of interactions that really need to be done in person. You can't love an infant from afar, right? They don't feel it from afar. You need to actually swaddle them against your chest, right? You're sharing physiological co-regulation together and changing each other's physiological functioning in real time as a way to kind of build well-being together and kind of acculturate to one another. And then also other kinds of relationships, and this is more relevant, I think, today in the online and digital stuff, other kinds of like close romantic relationships and things like that too. You build them in person. You can certainly meet people online, you can have conversations, you can learn about them, but there's something about, quote unquote chemistry, right? There's something about being in the physical presence of another person that is part of the experience of bonding with that person. And so some of what I think we're seeing with a lot of, especially young people who are doing like a lot of online dating and things like that, and not spending a lot of time in person with people that they are supposedly in romantic relationships with, is that we don't see the kind of intuitive sort of alignment between people, and it doesn't feel good to people. Like these relationships aren't as satisfying. And we really have to start dealing with that, these are tools we can use to make connections for sure and to start, but then at a certain point, relationships are built in person together, and there's probably lots of biological signaling that's happening all the time, pheromones, other kinds of subtle, movements and patterns of, breathing and of co-regulation and things like that that are happening that you're not even consciously aware of, that help you to kind of feel yourself in the presence of another person. And so, it really depends on what the interaction is for and the level of skillfulness and maturity that the person doing the interaction brings to it.
Yeah, I was even thinking about like the dating thing, because again, I'm well past that, thank goodness, but how like over time, I think when I first started dating my wife, I don't know how impressed she was with me, to be honest with you. But she would see, I remember her seeing me interacting with my family, and thinking, oh, he's not so bad.
Yeah.
Right? He's nice to his dad.
Yeah, right.
Right.
Yeah. How do you do that on
Zoom? There was
Zoom,
like this
right?
turning point,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
When
yeah.
she kind of came home to to meet my parents, and
Yeah.
she was like, wow, you and your dad have a nice relationship. You're
Yeah.
funny. You're fun. You love him. You
Yeah.
care for him, right? But like, how do you do that on a dating app?
Yeah, you can't
Right?
do that.
You can't do that, right? There's like
Right.
there's biology involved. Yeah. What about sticking with sort of distance learning for in terms of personalization? You hear a lot about that now.
Yeah.
I mean, is there a place for that? I mean, how do you make sense as teachers? We think about this. We're highly relational at Synapse. We're very social. I talk about this often on admissions tours. We are like a really social learning environment. Can you get that? Can a 8-year-old, can a 12-year-old, the typical kid, can they get that online? Can they get a personalized approach online and a social approach online?
Well, I think you mean two different things by personalized. One, you mean kind of personalized in the sense that you are impersoned in a real physical context that's a social context with other people. And that's what you mean when you talk about Synapse having a really strong social culture.
Yes.
Right. But then there's another kind of personalized, which is it's tailoring the input to you to suit the needs you have at that moment.
Right.
And so, I think the answer would be sort of in both cases. So like, there are certainly affordances to get on Khan Academy and like learn something that you need to know how to do that you don't understand. And, they've got a fantastic explanation for it. If you have the need, again, it's because the maturity, the role of holding together the social interaction falls entirely on the person engaging with the machine. So if I know what I need, I know how to get it, I know how to interact with that video in a way that I can benefit from it, and then I take that and I use it in a broader context somewhere else where I needed it, then it can be a fantastic tool, right? It's a fantastic tool. But is that enough for children to develop entirely in that kind of, standoff, distanced way where it's on them to build the social part of the math? No, they can't do that. And so they need relationships around them. So we can leverage the tools for what they're good for. They make all kinds of things available to kids who otherwise wouldn't have access to them, potentially. And they're very handy when you need a just-in-time answer to exactly the thing you don't know how to do. Then they're fantastic if you know how to use them. But then you take them back to something that you're working on that's bigger than that, that's situated in some kind of cultural context. It may not be a social context in the sense of having more people in it than just yourself, but you're doing something that is valued or socially contextualized or understood as meaningful in the current culture in which we live. And so you are building something that you own, that you have agency within, that becomes something meaningful to you, and you're pulling in this information and tools into that. And when but that what the thing that you're building for most people is in a social context, but not for everybody. But it's always in a kind of cultural context, because it always comes from or emerges from the place that you're in, the affordances of that place, the time, the situation, the kind of the liabilities, the things that are needing to be solved at that moment, and the ways that you have to solve them, and the current understandings you've shared from other people, and all the experiences you've brought from that, from your life to that point, to that place, becomes the sort of cultural tableau in which you're working. And that machines can't build for you.
Got it. All right, I want to, something that I think about a lot is this, schools are in the business of human development, right? But there's often this other side of sort of academics as well, right? They're bifurcated. And I've never met an educator, or certainly haven't seen a school that doesn't lean one direction or the other, right? I'm simplifying it. I know it's much more complicated. But how as a school head, how should I answer that question when I'm asked that? Like, is this school academic, or is it human development? Because I sometimes get that question, right? Synapse is great, SEL, amazing, wonderful, relationships, great, but yeah, the academics, and I'm like, and I get frustrated, and I don't have a clear answer.
Well, okay, so if we think for a minute about what are the academics for, and what makes people interested in things, and think for a minute about the nature of the mind, what it means to think. There is no such thing as thinking that does not have an emotional component to it. Otherwise, why would you bother doing it? There is no thinking that does not have a cultural frame around it. Otherwise, it would be completely ungrounded. There would be the thought would not come from anywhere. Thoughts are built from need. They're built from things you notice, from things you experience, from things you witness, from things you imagine, all of which is in turn built from experiences you've had and the things that are around you that you're noticing, that you're interacting with, that you're adapting to. I mean, I said this earlier today, but this is why putting a person in solitary confinement is torture, right? If you were a machine, putting a machine in a solitary confinement would be great. Like, nothing's bothering it. It doesn't have to fix itself. Nothing's going to break it. It just can sit there, right? Humans are not that. We lose our sense of self when we don't have others around us to co-construct it. That South African notion of Ubuntu, I think, I am because you are, right, is really quite intuitively true. And so, what does this mean about quote unquote social emotional learning versus quote unquote academic learning? So there is a side of social emotional learning, which is a specific set of skills that for your age group, in this time and place in which you find yourself, you need to be able to recognize and manage certain kinds of situations that are social situations. When a kid says this to you and you don't want to do this, what are you going to do, right? And so there's that side of social emotional learning, and that's a piece. It's important, but it's a small piece. When you think about what is actual scholarly thinking, what is the scholarship that we think of as academics, it's actually meaningful scholarship is much broader than just ingesting these transactional pieces that somebody gives you. It's you bringing a socialized, acculturated, affective sense of need to an idea space, and then working within that idea space and trying to construct new levels of understanding, new kinds of predictions, new kinds of imagined possible things, trying to build out the conceptual, abilities to predict what's going to happen, or to understand why things happen the way they do, or to try to express those things you've noticed to other people. And that space is the space of, I don't like to call it academic, it's the space of scholarship, it's the space of deep thinking, it's a fundamentally social, cultural, emotional, and cognitive space all at once. And you're moving in this kind of agentic way through deep ideas and steering your mind towards things you notice and pulling in information that you think could be relevant and trying to reconcile those and deconstructing them and reconstructing them in ways that enable you to start to have a better appreciation or a different appreciation of some nature of reality than you did before. That's both academic and social and emotional at the same time. So high quality social emotional stuff is academic, and high quality academic learning is social and emotional. When you're learning to manage written language, what are you doing with it? Are you just a robot who can decode? No, that doesn't get you past third grade, right? And it doesn't even really get you to third grade very well. But you're using language to invent poetry, to tell stories, to express opinions, to share other people's stories and opinions and poems, and right, and to appreciate those and to entertain yourself with them and to imagine their positions and their stories and to use that for entertainment as well as for learning, right? It's an interactive, socially driven, culturally meaningful set of practices. And that's what real academic learning, the kind of academic learning that actually promotes deep motivated work over time, deep understanding, and actually eventually innovations within fields, very, very high levels of insight or of skillfulness within disciplinary domains. Those come from a space of deep caring about the ideas. You know, if you stop and talk to a mathematician about why they're a mathematician, they tell you because math is fascinating, it's beautiful, it's amazing, right? And like there are studies showing, Samir Zeki at University College London did these lovely studies showing that mathematicians who are reacting to equations in the MRI scanner, equations that are either elegant and beautiful, or equations that are ugly and awkward, right? They're all true equations. But you know, the fact that mathematicians can intuitively know exactly what you mean by those instructions, please tell me whether you think this equation that I'm about to show you is elegant and beautiful or awkward and ugly. They are like, okay, great, I know how to do that, right? They intuitively bring aesthetic appreciation to the equations that are elegant because of their power for explaining other things, bigger ideas, broader things than just that one piece. And in order for you to appreciate that, I don't know, E equals mc squared is a really elegant equation because it very simply and parsimoniously explains huge properties of the universe, right? You have to know something about the universe and about how to use that formula and about what it refers to before you can actually have that aesthetic judgment and feeling. So the emotional feeling is part of the knowledge itself. The ability to feel in awe of an equation means you thoroughly understand that equation. So the emotional aspect of the learning and of the thinking is driving no matter what level of academic, quote unquote, progress you've made.
From the earliest ages.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so, so you have created that environment, right? And where that's happening. I think Synapse does a lot of this. How do you, what's the best way to assess that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because right now we have assessment around, it's focused a lot on outcomes, right? I mean, not so much at Synapse, but like in general, I mean, there are these sort of outcome orientations. What if a school could do it, could design it from scratch? If they could,
yeah. Well, you're going to use different kinds of assessments to tell you different kinds of things about what is going on. And so a really great school assesses many ways to understand with rich complexity what's actually going on. So there are, ways of doing what you might call in-process assessment. So really skilled teachers who have a lot of developmental knowledge about what kind of developmental capacities a child is working with in service of learning this thing, right? They're assessing the way in which the child is approaching the work, the kinds of thoughts and patterns of mind that they're bringing to it. Do they recognize intuitively certain kinds of mathematical patterns? How do they take those mathematical patterns and then translate them across into a different domain or problem space, right? Those kinds of mental movements are process-oriented, and you're watching them being enacted, and that's how you assess them. And then there's also the child's own awareness of their own learning, which is something very important to assess, because your own, I used to think, now I think, right? That kind of awareness of your own learning is part of that self-awareness that, we talked about earlier. It's part of your ability to actually manage yourself within a problem domain, is to know, what do I know here? What do I think I might know, but I should actually step back and deconstruct it and make sure, what are the things we think are true that maybe they aren't true? Maybe we should look at them a different way or not, right? Moving back in and out, being aware of what you know is the essence of intellectual humility. It's the ability to build curiosity when there's tensions amongst what you think you ought to know and what you really do know, right? And so there's that whole dimension of the learning process, and you want to assess that through kids' demeanors of mind, and the teachers too. What are your sort of dispositions of mind? If you have an opportunity to learn something new and interesting, what do you do with that, right? You know, we have a new study that we just heard today got accepted for publication in Nature Scientific Reports, which is about, we sat with 65 kids from low SES, inner city Los Angeles, who were, you know, passing all their classes in school, doing what they're supposed to do, right? Not in trouble. 9th and 10th grade kids mainly, but they were 14 to 18 years old at the beginning of the study. We sat with them, we shared with them 40 true stories about real teenagers' lives from all over the world. You know, here's this girl in Pakistan. Have you ever heard of Pakistan? Well, there's this place there's this group called the Taliban. Ever heard of them? Well, here's what happened. And she wants to go to school, but she can't because they don't let you, right? And let's hear from her, right? And there's no actors. And then we just say, how does this person's story make you feel, right? And then the kids talk about 40 stories like that in an interview. Based on the way kids talked about those stories, we were able to predict their subsequent brain development, how their brains would change relative to their current state over the subsequent 2 years, right? You're predicting the future. That's the holy grail. What predicts how that kid's brain is going to grow over the next 2 years? It's predicted by basically the degree of curiosity, their propensity to ask or to try to figure out what are the broader implications here? What are the more transcendent ways of understanding this? So not just, oh, that girl there in Pakistan, that's really sad, that's too bad, wish I could help her. That's great, that's important too. And doing that was associated with having good relationships, a nice, broader range of friends, more ethnically diverse friends, things like that. But also going beyond and saying, but wait a minute, are you telling me not everybody in the world gets to go to school, even though they have schools there and they want to? Well, but now that I think about that, that's not right. That makes me really upset, right? And then they start to get upset and mad about not that situation with that girl, but about the fact that such a thing could be true in the world. And then from there, start to figure out, well, what could I do about it? And what do I believe is true? And what does this mean for my values, my beliefs, my ethical endorsements of things in the world, my ability to query the functioning of systems and of institutionalized procedures for doing things. One kid I remember asking me, it was a story about an immigrant kid who was brought across the border as an infant who did not know that they were not properly documented. And long story, the kid became a journalist at Time magazine and then inadvertently found this out, and it was right. And the kid asked me at the end, like, wait a minute, I never did understand. Can I just ask, like, why do they make lines in the dirt and they say people born on this side can do these things, but these people on this side can't do it? And like, I never did understand that. Is that a good way to do it? Why do we do it like that, right? So it's not just about having the fancy language. It's just querying things. If I give you a really interesting, complex situation with a lot of implications, what do you do with that, kid? Right? And every kid in the study did this kind of transcendent thinking, we're calling it, at least a couple of times over the 2-hour interview. So every kid could do it. So it's not a capacity, can you? It's a do you. It's kind of like exercise. Most people could exercise in various ways. We're going to have to adjust for different needs and things like that. Most people could exercise and get more fit. But the question is, do you? Only if you do it will you actually show the benefit. And that's what we saw here. So kids who were showing us that they were inclined to engage in this kind of thinking dispositionally, we say, how does the story make you feel? And they start asking us questions about, like, wait, did you mean to tell me, right? Those kids are growing their brain more over the next 2 years. Literally, physically, we see physical changes in the brain that are more robust the more they did this. And then in turn, that brain growth, so not the kind of brain the kid has, but the amount, Mary Helen at age 15, Mary Helen at age 17, how has Mary Helen's brain changed from age 15 to 17? The amount of change I grow in myself as I work through the world in those 2 years, that change predicts my identity development and how happy I am with myself when I'm a young adult. How achieved I am in school or work, how much kids just answer a simple slidey thing, like how much do you like the person whom you've become? slide the little slidey back and forth. How much are you satisfied with all these relationships in your life? And we list all the people you could have relationships with. Your parent, your child, your romantic partner, your teacher, your boss at work, your coworker, right? Like, how satisfied are you? They're more satisfied with their own relationships. And they answer questions like, to what degree do you think that your work or your school that you're doing right now is what you always hope for yourself? It's really a great opportunity for you to really grow yourself how you want to. They feel like what they're doing is really what they've always wanted for themselves. The more they grew their brain, and the more they grew their brain was the more they showed this disposition. And what's interesting in the longitudinal data, that means the data that we follow the same kids for 5 years, is that you can't jump from the beginning to the end. The way the kids talked in the interview does not predict how happy they are as adults. You can't just say, I really like exercising. You have to actually do it.
Do it.
And then when you get to the end, you're more fit, right? So where was I going with this? Yeah, I don't remember anymore.
You're going.
Yeah, I'm going somewhere. But I think the idea that we could come back around to is it's these dispositions to grow yourself, to engage in particular ways that good schooling needs to assess. Yeah, we're coming back to assessment, right? We found a way to assess something in kids that would allow us to predict their brain development and then how happy they would be and how much they'd like their life and how much they would achieve in their life in young adulthood by listening to them, right? That's what we need to be doing in schools, is finding ways to listen to kids. And we do have ways. It's not like nobody's ever thought of this. But looking at not just what a kid knows how to do, but how they're coming to the work. How are they thinking about things? And part of how they're thinking about things is them actually being able to articulate in some form or modality. It might be dancing it, it might be musically expressing it or artistically expressing it or showing it through equations, or it might be writing an essay, but they need to be able to sort of exteriorize and share their understanding and the meaning they're making with others from the domain or discipline. And that process of exteriorizing helps you kind of make sense of where you're at and take stock. And that's another kind of assessment. And then also, we also talked today about studies we did together with a really brilliant young researcher, Solange Denervaux in Switzerland, who was a Montessori teacher, Montessori school teacher in Geneva, right, where there's Montessori schools is a thing there. It's a very specific, regulated, very special kinds of teacher certification for it and all this stuff. And then there's traditional schools that are kind of more traditional in the role of the teacher. And so she, all these kids are high SES, they're all white, basically. They're all high achieving. So she went in and did neuroimaging studies with 8 to 12-year-olds who were doing math problems from these two kinds of schools all over the city. And what we found was that kids from the Montessori and the traditionally schooled, backgrounds got the same score right on the math test that we gave them. They knew the same amount of math, quote unquote. But that's where the similarity ended. So the Montessori kids got far more wrong than the traditionally schooled kids because they don't skip anything. Where the traditionally schooled kids were taking a look at something, and if they weren't sure, they weren't taking a chance at it. And then over the course of the experiment, we could show with machine learning that the Montessori style of learning was actually enabling kids to learn more across the time. And over time, sure enough, Montessori kids were more effective at self-correcting, so they didn't make the same error again. Whereas the traditionally schooled kids would make the same error over and over again because they were afraid to ever give it a whirl and try something else. And we showed neural differences. So when the Montessori kids got an answer right when they were in the MRI scanner on a math problem, we really don't see a lot happen. That's not that meaningful to them. When they got it wrong, you see this concerted activity of connection across the brain where it's kind of like their center of the brain being like, whoa, okay, wait, that wasn't what I expected. Connects up to the frontal lobe, which is like planful, executive function, thinking, planning, trying to figure it out. And right parietal lobe, which is involved in mathematical and spatial reasoning. It's as if they're trying to figure out what happened, right? And then they're more likely to get it right the next time. Whereas when the traditionally schooled kids got something right, we see massive connection between the part of their brain, like, oh, wow, I got it right, and the hippocampus, which is long-term memory storage. It's as if as soon as they see they got the right answer, they're like, remember that answer. That's the right answer to that problem. They're trying to remember an answer. right? And when they got it wrong, we just kind of see lots of activity that's sort of like a neural freakout fit, but we couldn't find any recognizable pattern that it would actually lead to anything next time. And they weren't more likely to get it right the next time, right? So how does this relate to assessment? The math test they took, they all got the same score. But the way in which they engage with the math thinking process is really remarkably different. And so you would also want to have an equivalent test where you said, yep, all these kids can do these math problems, right? But then you also want to go behind that and say, but show me how you're thinking about it, right? And that you can do in strategic ways by saying like, hey, this problem you got right, explain to me about it. This problem you got wrong, explain to me about it. What were you thinking? Now what are you thinking? Why is that not as good as it could have been? Or, what did you not understand before? Well, I used to think it was this, but now I understand it's more like this, and so I did it wrong because of this, and I'm going to go back, right? Those kinds of assessments that are more complete in that way. And also, especially in K-8, but I think all the time, allowing kids, in fact, when I was a 7th grade teacher, I required kids to go back and completely correct all their tests. Redo all the problems that you had anything in there that you didn't get right. Because you need to really thoroughly understand. And then they had to write a little essay. These kids just love me, by the way. Kidding. They had to write a little thing about what they thought when they were writing the other answer, how that is not correct, and the new answer and why they think it now, right? And then they had to do all that. They could help each other. They could look at each other's tests. They could do all that. But then you had to sit down yourself and write about what was I thinking before, why is that not right, and how am I thinking now? And kids were actually learning this stuff. So, I mean, assessment was your question. This is probably a bigger answer than you ever hoped for, but like you really have to look in many different ways to get a more complete picture of what's going on. And so it depends what you want to know.
Good answer. Okay. I'm looking at the clock. So we're going to wrap up. But before we do, you are an expert on the brain. You have so much knowledge. You're also a mother to 2 kids that seem to, from what I understand, they're killing it. They're awesome.
They're awesome.
They
Just
are.
because
They
they're
seem super
awesome.
great.
All kids are awesome.
Right.
They're cute and
so
cool, and they're doing their awesome thing. Yeah.
You're a parent, and as you know, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to make any assumptions, but you learn a lot through trial and error as you go.
Along the way,
So
yes.
speaking out to the people here tonight, if there was one thing you would tell them about learning and their kid, if they're a teacher, kids, but if it's a parent, their own kid, what would you tell them? One thing, actionable thing.
One actionable thing. My God, that's a hard question. I would say, can I say more than one actionable thing?
Yes, you can say
One thing, treat your kid like a human. They are a human. They are a person. They have a mind. Your job is not to control any other human on the planet. That's not your job. I mean, unless there's an imminent safety, right? You've got a 2-year-old who's reaching for the butcher knife on the counter. Like, absolutely, the answer is positively no, and I'm going to grab your arm and not let you grab the knife, right? Okay, in a situation like that, sure. But the rest of the time, your job is not to control other people, and in fact, you really can't control other people. Try to get a 2-year-old to stop screaming. Short of suffocating them, it's impossible. And I know from experience. I did not suffocate anybody, but I know it's impossible, right? So your job is to help kids set out their world in such a way that they can learn to manage themselves. Your job is not to manage them directly, except in direct safety concerns, right? And that is true all the way through, right? And then also the second part, which is the human part. Understand that these are little humans under your care. Your job is to help them find their way in the world. It's not to take and impose yourself on them, and it's not to have expectations that are concrete for them. Like, I want you to be an X, or I want you to do this career of a Y, or be good at Z, right? Your job is to help you be good at something, and something that you love, and something that you're interested in. And my job is to make sure that as you go through your development, you have been able to teach yourself skills for managing yourself into places that are difficult and sitting with that. Building dispositions for working hard when something that you're working hard matters and is meaningful to you. Building dispositions for querying your own beliefs. Building dispositions for being able to stick it through, to step back and be resilient and come back at it another way, to find the things that matter to you, to bring that kind of curiosity, that kind of openness to experience, that kind of humility and humbleness to the world. Those are the things that you as a parent model, encourage, and set your kid in situations where you hope they'll have chances to learn those things, and then help them to learn those things. But the rest is up to them.
Great answer. Mary Helen, I'm so happy you're here.
Thanks, I love being
really
here.
honored to be talking with you up here on
Thank
the
you.
stage. You're just delightful.
Likewise.
You are experienced, and we're better for it. Thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah, thank you for having me.